And going live. Good evening, everyone. Let's see if we can get our IG folks to join us. Yeah. Yes, and checking the connection. Good evening and welcome to Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint on this evening of May 21st, Friday evening. Welcome. And happy to have you join us. Let me just refocus my IG folks. There we go. Come in and join. And again, if for connectivity issues, we are live streaming this on various platforms. So follow Mass Mother Mary, and you'll be able to check us out. And we keep the streams up, so you can always check back in. So for this evening, we are going to take a look at the data very briefly, which not much of an update. Slow progress this week. But then also a couple of questions have come up, and so we'll take a little bit of time and talk about what our thoughts are on some of these questions in terms of what's going on here, and look at how the commission in Massachusetts is guiding the public with the information that they're providing on what's available in terms of these questions. So let's not even belabor the point and jump in. The first question that was asked, or that's been asked of us here, is, so what are the penalties in Massachusetts when it comes to cannabis, period? And so we're gonna break that up. And in my angst to jump into the cannabis, I just want to highlight what the data is showing here right now is we have 239 businesses that are operating in Massachusetts, which is pretty much the same. That includes retailers, just retail stores where you can go in. It also includes businesses that are operating in terms of providing recreational cultivation space and product manufacturers. So going back to the penalties, when it comes to possession, the penalties at most are a civil fine of around $100, and give or take, depending on what it is. In Massachusetts, you can legally have up to an ounce on your person, and if you have more, then you can be fined. In your home, you can have anything around. You can have up to 10 ounces in your home, and then you can also grow, which is something that a lot of states across the country have not adopted. So you can grow your own plants as well. And this information is made available to the public on the Cannabis Control Commission's website as well. What isn't made clear is what happens if you are deemed selling or distributing cannabis without a license. And particularly, we look at this through the lens of children who are disproportionately disciplined in our school systems, and we talk about the school to prison pipeline and the impact that this has there. And the information that's presented to the public on the Cannabis Control Commission does not go into that. However, it becomes up to the discretion of the enforcement, of law enforcement. And so what that basically means is it still carries legally a misdemeanor penalty, and that includes jail time, that includes consequences tied to cannabis use when there are businesses that are making millions of dollars on the use of and access of the same plant. And again, enforcement plays a role because now it has to be demonstrated that you or the individual that was arrested for distribution, it has to be demonstrated how the evidence that they are distributing was it the quantity, how it was packaged, et cetera, and all of these factors play a role in terms of why we continue to see a disparity in arrest rates despite cannabis being legal in our industry. And so I think it's a little bit misleading when you look at the Cannabis Control Commission's website, where it talks about know your laws, know what the laws say, and the violations that they highlight simply talk about possession, and it doesn't really go into any of what the regulations, one of the statutes, the laws around anything else tied to the plant, particularly distribution, selling. And again, there also has to be proof that the goal was to sell and not necessarily to share, because Massachusetts does recognize the privilege that individuals have to gift, share, donate cannabis prior to it going legal in the medical space. Medical patients did have that option with the caregiver aspect, but I'm not going to belabor that. I think for the conversation that we're having here, for the purposes of equity, and when folks ask, well, how is it that we still have disparity in arrests? How is it that, what are the penalties tied to there? Are they just civil? There's this misinformation, and so there's the clarity for you. In general, most of the penalties tied to possession are civil penalties with a minor fine. It doesn't matter if you're under the age of 21 or over the age of 21. If you are under the age of 21, that they tend to also recommend diversion programs to go along with that civil fine. And then depending on your age, they may also involve parents in terms of informing parents, right? However, misdemeanor criminal fines, criminal penalties still exist, still persist, and law enforcement are still exercising their discretion when it comes to what may be deemed distribution. And again, it's still illegal federally, so they can always rest on that and make the distinction in terms of enforcement there. So that's that. Switching gears a little bit, we did get this question, and we've talked about it before, as to, are there medical dispensaries that are owned in the state of Massachusetts that are owned by minorities or owned by Black and brown folks? And the short answer to that is no. The entry for owning a medical dispensary in Massachusetts, that entry barrier is quite high. You still have to demonstrate a financial capital of $500,000. I think you have to demonstrate that you have on the books just to open up a medical dispensary, along with all of the other requirements. Currently, the licensing around medical dispensary is vertical integration, as opposed to in the recreational space. You can determine if you just want to do retail, or if you want to just pursue a product manufacturing license or just a cultivation license. Whereas in the medical, in pursuit of the medical license, they are all coupled together. So currently, right now, there aren't any that are owned, that are Black or brown owned in Massachusetts. I think the other piece to highlight, especially when we talk about equity in cannabis, when we talk about ownership and the opportunities that exist, is that while Massachusetts has rolled out their equity programs, and their programming around licensing includes waivers to fees, prioritization in terms of application reviews, and technical assistance to certain equity participants, not all of them. They do not cover, none of these benefits, none of these supports and services that the commission has promulgated, none of them apply to medical dispensaries. And so we won't see the needle move in terms of equity in the medical community and the medical space until we see efforts around that from the regulating body as well. And right now that conversation has not taken place. And so while we recognize as a state the value of cannabis, the medicinal value of it, in fact, we recognize that before we acknowledge the recreational aspect of it, before we monetized it and allowed for taxation of it in a greater capacity by legalizing it. Yet when it comes to equity, there isn't conversation about that. And that's important. We've talked about it in other I think in other sessions, but specifically in this context here with equity in the medical space, why that matters, because it also matters in terms of how these existing dispensaries are able to meet, treat, and provide support to those who want to utilize the plant for medicinal purposes. And when we have communities that have been disproportionately targeted, and with that target came a strong stigmatization against using the plant, despite the potential and the medicinal impact that it can have, and the quality of life that they can enjoy from participating with that plant. When we don't have these types of businesses, these types of owners that bring a diverse perspective, that bring a connection to the community in this way, we continue to perpetuate the status quo, one, and we continue to perpetuate the disparity in access. And so this is another reason why it's important to continuously bring this to the forefront in our equity minutes. When we're looking at it, we're not just talking about recreation. We're talking recreational cannabis. We're not just talking about owning a retail business. We're talking about access and participation across the board. Hence the reason why, it is important that we highlight the legislation here in Massachusetts that says equitable participation in this industry. It didn't just say, they want to see diverse owners in retail spaces. And I think when we look at the conversations that are brought forth around social equity or equity in this cannabis industry, those conversations tend to get pigeonholed in who are the owners in the retail spaces. And what we're saying here is that it's not just retail owners. We need to see this across the board in terms of all ownership in all aspects of these industry, because cultivators are the ones that are the provider. They are the foundation for this industry. So we should have this conversation about from that lens. Product manufacturers, when we're looking at what types of products out there, who are the market that they're catering to, and who is playing a role in decision making and providing these types of products to the various communities. Are we opening that up to have equitable participation there? When we talk about the medical space, again, so equity in cannabis is not just about retail ownership. It's not just about being able to say, hey, it's legal and now I can smoke weed in the streets and not be arrested for it. It encompasses so much more, and it's important that we are mindful of that, because what will happen is we'll continue to see disparity in arrest rates if we don't bring this conversation to the forefront and look at it through the lens of equity. We're going to continue to see status quo, business as usual in this industry, where we will see that white males are continuing to dominate and lead this industry, and our Black males, Black participants, I have to use the term participants, aren't present on the legal side. They aren't present in the space of ownership, decision making, and driving the direction of this industry. Whereas we know that Black and white folks have participated in this industry in the traditional market, the legacy market, or what some may deem, the law enforcement deems, the illicit market. They participated equitably, despite the arrests not showing that. So that's the update in that space with that question. And then another question came up about our positive impact plans, and why is there a focus on the how the positive impact plans are supporting the equity program participants? And so I thought this question was pretty interesting, because when we look at positively impacting a community, cleaning up a community, yes, that positively impacts the community. Providing donations to the local food pantry, that positively impacts a community, absolutely. And any business in a community should be looking for how they can be responsible I guess they call it corporate social responsibility, if you will. So it doesn't matter what the industry is. We should see that as a community when you're looking at it through a lens of economically uplifting any type of community, any business that comes into your neighborhood. That's what you want to see. However, with cannabis, what we see with cannabis has prior to us talking about it and using the term cannabis, it was called marijuana, and the stigma around it decimated communities. Now, when we talk about any other industry, we don't have the same history. And so what do we mean by it decimated? We had folks who were arrested, they were targeted. That's what the war on drugs was about. And the impact that the war on drugs wasn't just an individual being arrested. The impact that the war on drugs had crossed sectors. It had what we call collateral consequences. It wasn't just one individual. It wasn't even just that individual and their family. It impacted the community in that now we had children who were growing up in homes where they did not have both of their parents. Their parents were locked up because of their participation of a plant. We had law enforcement demonstratively targeting, attacking our children, attacking adults around their participation with the plant, using the plant, trumped up charges. We saw disparity in these charges that tracked with individuals. So it wasn't just an arrest. It wasn't just being roughed up, stop and frisk. I think this was a comment that came up last week when we talked about why do we focus on Black and brown individuals. When you look at the data around stop and frisk and who law enforcement were stopping and frisking, where the communities were, that this policy, these policies were enforced, this habit of practice was enforced. It's in the Black and brown neighborhoods. It's in Black communities that this started and continues to perpetuate. And so when we take this to cannabis, and we take this to cannabis businesses and legalization in the cannabis space, it's important that we go back to the same, Massachusetts, the Cannabis Control Commission calls it cohorts, if you will, these same populations, these same categories of people. And we need to see how these businesses that are now being erected on the legal side of this industry, how they are coupling their efforts to positively impact to the very populations and cohorts that were directly negatively impacted. And so without really belaboring the point, the bottom line is with cannabis, we have those who benefit and who benefit demonstratively now that it's legal. And we have populations of people who continue to suffer from enforcement, to suffer from prohibition, despite it being legal. Let's be clear, if you have a cannabis record, if you have a record tied to your cannabis use, and it's not considered a misdemeanor or wasn't considered a minor infraction, that record is still persists. And what happened when people were being arrested or targeted for cannabis, they would get additional charges. What are some examples? So I talked about it previously, individuals who just have been arrested for cannabis, and because this was a third offense, now they are facing life without parole. And here it is, this was a nonviolent offense. And so these are some of the ramifications that, despite it being legal now, all of the other issues tied to that arrest play a role. It creates criminality where criminality would not have existed had that individual not been targeted through law enforcement around cannabis / marijuana. And that's why it's important now when we talk about corporate social responsibility, when we talk about positive impact plans, and we're looking at it through the lens of equity in cannabis, we want to see equitable actions. We want to see positive impact plans that directly tie to those who have been harmed. This is the opportunity for that. This is the space for it. Anything else becomes a handout. And I use this term specifically because here in Massachusetts, that's what we heard the previous social justice chair use that term when we described the PIES program, which is a positive impact style program. It is a program that I designed that takes the vehicle of the positive impact. It takes the vehicle of the equity program participants, all of these vehicles that currently exist in Massachusetts, provides a structure to it so that we can see equitable participation, so that we can see the needle on equity move. And what the onus now becomes, we see the businesses playing a role, playing a demonstrative role, a measurable role in moving this needle, in supporting equitable participation, in meeting their positive impact responsibility, and meeting their requirements for their licensure renewals. We see them being able to do that in a structured manner. We see equity program participants able to enter into this industry without these loopholes that have been existed under the guise of barriers of entry. We see that now in play because now we have created a relationship that is going to be necessary anyways, because when you enter into this industry, whether or not you're a retailer, you need suppliers so that you have product to sell. If you're a product manufacturer, you need suppliers for flower, and you need an outlet to sell your products. And if you're a cultivator, you need outlets for your flower. So it fosters relationship building. This is what the PIES program does. And it gets at equity, seeing the needle move, seeing us have conversations. And when we pull up the data and we say there's 240 operational businesses, 250, 270 moving forward, we see that these businesses are owned by folks who have been already identified as being harmed by the disproportionately by the war on drugs, whether they're economic empowerment certificate holders or there are social equity program participants that are looking to be business owners in this space. And so we get at all of those, we get at all of these issues that continue to persist with one simple program. And it really gets at the heart of what people are talking about around positive impact. And there isn't, I think when you just say the phrase positive impact, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And those who don't know the history or choose not to acknowledge the history can then put forth a plan and say, hey, this positively impacts, we need to see communities support around animals, our donation to the animal shelter, that positively impacts the community. Yes, but it doesn't tie to cannabis and the reason why we have the positive impact plans embedded in the regulatory aspect of pursuing a cannabis license. That had nothing to do with just simply being a responsible business owner in your community. It has everything to do with the negative stigma, the decimation of communities, the negative impact of prohibition and enforcement because of cannabis, because of the war on drugs, because of the campaign centered around targeting Black and Brown people and leveraging their use of marijuana at the time, and the continued negative impact of it. That's why the positive impact plans was established as one of the requirements for having a license here in Massachusetts. And so when we talk about positively impacting social responsibility in the cannabis space, then the conversation needs to continue to focus on why, and the resolution, the solution needs to go back to the why and not just be free interpretation, just looking at the word positive. And if that's the case, then maybe we need to go back and revisit the term positive and make sure that it's clear why we have it structured the way that it is. And it's important that when the Cannabis Control Commission is evaluating positive impact plans, that they're evaluating them to make sure that they are targeting those cohorts. And when applications are coming before them, that they aren't even reviewing applications if the application is not explicitly targeting those who have been harmed, targeting those who are directly by the war on drugs, those communities that have been identified as being disproportionately impacted, even more specifically, the individuals who have been identified as economic empowerment certificate holders or social equity program participants looking to enter into this industry. If they're not targeting those populations specifically, these applications shouldn't even be reviewed. I think currently right now, there are applications that do get to be that are being presented to the commission, and when the commissioners are determining whether or not they should be issued a provisional license, if it's not clear that the positive impact plan is going to go directly to benefit this specific cohort, then the provisional license is issued with a condition. And I think that before the application is even reviewed, in the same vein that the rest of the application needs to meet all of the other requirements when it comes to the regulatory requirements around security, business plans, and so forth, the background checks, et cetera. The application isn't even reviewed if the background checks aren't done. That same level of expectation and accountability should be had when it comes to positive impact. And that would demonstrate to businesses the importance of looking at what they are putting together for positively impacting the community, and why they need to take heed to guidance that the commission puts out in terms of around positive impact, and making sure that their application that they are presenting has solid details, solid goals that are going to move the needle on equity. And then going back to our conversation last week, right? It also puts the onus on the Cannabis Control Commission to make sure that what they're putting out for guidance around positive impact plans, what they're highlighting as model positive impact plans, really drive at actions that are going to move the needle on equity, because that's the first charge. That's the legislative mandate there, is that we move the needle on equity, that we see equitable participation. How are we measuring that? Well, we are measuring who the owners are in this industry, and we're not seeing equitable participation there. And so these are some concrete things that the commission can do. And if the commission does this and is intentional about holding businesses accountable, the businesses are going to scramble to make sure that whoever's supporting them and putting their applications together, whatever firms are providing that guidance to them, that they have these measures in place so that they can secure their provisional license. If not, we're going to continue to see what we see, which is the industry in Massachusetts, the regulators falling back on the barriers of entry, when these barriers do not need to continue to persist. Not in our industry, and not with the current vehicles that we have in place. So with that, we'll wrap up for the evening. I think the other thing to highlight, even on the national front, in terms of data, we have not seen any other states move forward towards legalization. But people are continuing to have conversations in spaces on social equity. And so if you're looking to Massachusetts, there are lessons learned here. There are opportunities and missteps that we can address, and we have vehicles to address that. We have the PIES program as a structured way to do that. And stay tuned. We'll continue to look back. We are waiting to hear from the commission to see when the delivery license is going to be made available. Their promise to us was that it would be made available before the end of the month. So I presume next week, with our Cannabis Equity Minutes update, either on Tuesday or on Monday, we'll be able to chime in on what are the regulations that they've dropped and the application process made available for that. And so on that note, we will wrap up this evening. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on Tuesday. Check in on any of our platforms, and also our blog online at massmothermary.com, or Cannabis Equity Minutes. You can do a search for Cannabis Equity Minutes blog and find that as well. Thank you. So I'm going to end this and our broadcast here.
Good evening, everyone.
Here.